This is my beginner's guide to stitching beads and sequins onto felt to make your own ornaments. First, you'll need a beading needle, which is finer than a hand sewing needle. Just make sure it's fine enough to go through the beads you have. Let's start stitching on bugle beads and seed beads. To stitch on bugle beads, bring your needle up through the back of the felt, and I like to use hand quilting thread for this. Slide on a bugle bead and then position it in place on your felt. I like to use my non-sewing hand to hold it in place, then push the needle back through the back of the felt at the end of the bead. Sometimes bugle beads can be sharp inside and I like them really secure, so I stitch through all of my bugle beads twice. This will ensure that they will stay in place perfectly. Now to stitch on seed beads, it's similar. I bring my needle up through the back of the felt, I slide a seed bead onto my needle, and then I bring it back down through, but I only stitch on seed beads once. They're normally really round and smooth inside, so they're not going to cause any issues, and these are fast and easy to stitch on. You don't have to stitch them on one by one like this, but most of my felt ornament designs call for a smattering of beads, so this is the method that I'm showing you because this is what I do in my own felt ornaments. There are more advanced methods for stitching on beads and making shapes, but this is a very simple way to get into beading. Now let's say you have a larger bead and once you stitch it on, you find that it's a little bit wobbly just stitching through it once. If you're finding any of your beads don't feel secure, then just stitch through it a second time like you did with the bugle beads, and you'll see with this example that after I stitched through it a second time, it's really nice and secure and not moving at all. Those are the basic steps for how to stitch on beads in a random pattern. Now let's move on to sequins. There's a few different ways to stitch on sequins. Let's start with just using our thread. So slide a sequin onto your needle and position it in place on the felt. You've brought your needle up through the center, and now you're going to position your needle on the outside edge of the sequin and stitch back down. You can do one stitch. It keeps it a little bit loose, or you can stitch multiple times. So you can do 2 stitches or 3 stitches or 4 stitches. And of course you would probably be using a matching thread, so you're not going to see the stitches like you are now. I used white so that it would show up for you. This method, the sequin is very secure, but it's not really my preference. I don't like to see the stitching, so I'll show you what I do. I slide on a sequin and position it in place, and then I slide a seed bead or larger bead onto my needle and then push it back down through the hole. The bead needs to be larger than the hole, but then it'll secure it in place. On this ornament, I did the stitch, and I like that I could layer the sequins easily with this method, but on this ornament, I used a larger bead, and here I used seed beads. Now to finish any type of beading or stitching at the back, I like to just go back to the last stitch I made and use my needle and make a couple of knots. Then I'll bury the thread. It's hard, this is very thin felt, so just make sure you're not going through the other side, but I like to just bury it kind of through the layers of the felt and then trim the excess thread. Now for something really cool, let's do edge beading. So in a previous video, I showed you how to do a blanket stitch, and what you can do is just add a single bead to the blanket stitch and kind of blanket stitch around this bead. This is a simple way to add a little bit of sparkle to a stitch you're already doing, but let me show you something even cooler. I learned this from indigenous styles of beading when I was a historical reenactor. So if you stitch on multiple beads, then you can actually incorporate it into the blanket stitch. So here I'm stitching on 2 beads, and what I'm doing is I'm bringing it up through the back of the felt, and then I'm actually going through the last bead. So instead of stitching around the bead with the previous method, the beading is actually kind of part of the blanket stitch, and you can actually do a larger number of beads, but I usually like to start with 3, and then after that I'm always adding 2. I find this is a nice manageable amount. As a different variation on this, you can make this loop larger by adding more beads. It's the same process. You bring your needle back through the last bead to secure it, but this way you can add even more sparkle to an ornament. Here's a closer look at the 3 methods I like to use for adding beads to the edges of my ornaments. And here's how you can finish that off. So if you're done edge beading, bring your needle back through the last row of beads that you stitched on. And then you're going to want to push your needle back through to the back side of whatever ornament you're making, and then here you can knot off your thread using your needle. With this video, you'll be able to make all of the felt ornaments that I've shown you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments.